Hello, everybody. We are starting on section 3 in physiology, and this is one of my favorites. We're going to talk about reproductive anatomy and physiology and what's sex and gender. We're going to talk about fertility, pregnancy, and birth. And today, this video, we're going to start with sex and gender, and these are different terms. But they really matter. They matter greatly in how you interact with the world. And I just started with, this is way, way, way before your time, but on Saturday Night Live, there used to be a character called Pat. The show was It's Pat. And this was Pat, and people did not know if Pat was a man or woman. And the whole premise of the skit was it was funny because people didn't know how to interact with Pat because they didn't know if Pat was a man or a woman. And this is Pat's special friend, Chris, and it's a similar thing. People just didn't know. The point is we care. We interact differently. Not that we should, but we interact differently with people based on our assumptions of if they're male, female, man, or woman. So let's talk about that. Gender is different than sex, and I'll get to the definitions in a second, but how does gender affect our interactions with people? Do you personally deal differently with men and women? And I wish I was there in person. We could talk about this, but save this. We'll talk about it in our Zoom discussion online. So do you interact differently? Most people do. And also, how do you determine if somebody is male or female? That's going to be sex rather than gender. And whenever I ask that in class, somebody always says, Adam's apple. But really, is that the first one? Or if they have a penis. And do you really go look as you're walking down the street? There's other clues we get to determine somebody's sex and or gender, and they're not always correct. So let's talk about these terms. Sex and gender are different things. Sex is biological, male or female, and that's based on more anatomy and chromosomes and hormones even, but there's a continuum. It's not as black and white as we think. Gender, though, that's a social construct. That's how we describe somebody as a man or woman. And that's going to be the way we behave, the way we interact. That's a societal thing. And I will point out the difference between male and female. A dog is male or female. A person acts like a man, or acts, I'm making air quotes here, acts like a woman. What does a man act like? And that's going to depend on society, depends on the time you live in, depends on your town even. So that is very much not only just psychological behavioral, but it's society is going to help determine that. Now, gender role is the way society expects men and women to act, and the very same behavior may be considered not accepted based on if society portrays you or thinks you are a man or a woman. And gender identity, that's your sense of being male or female. And there's biological reasons that underlie that. So we're seeing differences in the brain of people who are transgender, people who were assigned the wrong gender at birth, and maybe what they were assigned matches their anatomy, but it doesn't match their brain. So what determines sex and or gender? Because we'll talk about both of them. And I'll tell you right now, it is not straightforward. We think it is. We think it's a binary. We think it's black or white, tall or short, man or woman, male or female. It is not. It's not as straightforward as we think it is. So there are many things that may play a role. So let's start, we're biologists, so let's start with chromosome. All right, if you're XY, you're male, and if you're XX, you're female. Well, first of all, there's a lot of other options. There's XO, there's Turner syndrome, there's XXY, Klinefelters, there's XYY. So it's not as straightforward as XX and XY, but even if it is, it's even then not straightforward. There's a condition called androgen insensitivity syndrome. So this woman, I consider her to be a woman, has a Y chromosome and internal testes, but external anatomy is female, has breasts, identifies as female for the most part. I mean, are you aware of all your chromosomes? We don't know what your chromosomes are. So the chromosomes alone do not determine sex. Well, maybe it's if you have testes, you're a male. If you have ovaries, you're a female. Maybe it's the gonads that you have determine it. Would that mean if you have testicular cancer and you have your testes removed, all of a sudden you were a male and now you're a female? Is that all it comes down to? And I think most of you will agree, no. If you have your ovaries removed, were you a female and now you're a male? No. Even sex isn't black and white. Well, maybe it's if you have a penis or a vagina. And that's what we teach you when you're 3 years old. Boys have a penis and girls have a vagina, which we should say boys have a penis and girls have a clitoris, but there are very few parents who are teaching their 3-year-olds about clitori, although many have already found it on their own. So is it maybe just boys have a penis and girls have a vagina? Well, there was a case before your time. Oh boy, did this make the news a whole bunch. John Wayne Bobbitt. John Wayne Bobbitt was a bad man. He beat his wife, he abused her, he cheated on her, and Lorena Bobbitt one night had enough. And when he was sleeping, I'm not recommending this as a course of action, but when he was sleeping, she cut off his penis and drove away with it and threw it in the woods. I think a hedgehog found it. But then she felt bad and they went and found the penis and sewed it back on. And he later went on to star in a porno as Frankenpenis. All right, but that's a whole different story. Now, when he had his penis intact, was he a male? And then she cut it off and, oh, now he's a female. And then they sewed it back on and then he's a male again? Obviously not. So it's not just having a penis or vagina. And also, is there a certain size? And if the penis, and I'm making air quotes, is too small, whatever that means, does that mean it's a large clitoris? So I should have warned you about the picture. There's a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And before you're born, you're exposed to a whole bunch of androgens. It's enzymes involved with cholesterol synthesis get out of whack. And so this is an XX female. This is labia that are starting to enlarge and look like scrotum, because that's the default anatomy is female. And so the default anatomy, labia become a scrotum, a clitoris becomes a penis. Default anatomy is female, but that is an enlarged clitoris. But at what point do you say, no, it's a small penis? It's very hard to make that call because sex and gender, it's not black and white, it's a continuum. Well, maybe it's what hormone you're exposed to when you hit puberty. So maybe it's just that, if you're male, you get a whole bunch of testosterone at puberty. And if you're female, you get a whole bunch of estrogen at puberty. Well, there's a condition called 5-alpha reductase deficiency. It's also called goivedoches, which means eggs at 12. And this is a condition that kids are born and they have labia, looks like a vagina and a clitoris, and they're raised as girls. And then they hit puberty and grow a penis. Because really they were much more male all along. They're XY, they had testes, but what they are missing is an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase, which converts testosterone to dihydrotestosterone. And if you remember from the last video, DHT, dihydrotestosterone, is the hormone that makes the penis grow before you're born. What makes the penis grow from a little baby penis to a grown man penis is testosterone. So they have testosterone. So internally, they've been masculinized. They have prostate gland and vas deferens. They have all the bits. Their muscles are prepared to be masculinized. Their brain, they have the testosterone. What they're missing at birth is the penis, and the default anatomy is female. So were they male? Were they female when they're born and then they become male? Most of them take on the male identity. Not all of them do, but they can father children. They have orgasms, they father children. So which one is it? And now we're getting more into gender. Maybe it's just what we assign you. Maybe gender is just all in your mind. And there's a famous sad case. And what happened, this was in the 60s, and there were these identical twin boys. And they were born in Canada in 1965. And they were diagnosed with phimosis, which is the foreskin won't retract. And so they were brought in to be circumcised when they were about 8 months old. And they were trying a new method of circumcision, and it used electricity. So they went with the first identical twin, and they put the little electrical thing on the penis to try and circumcise it. Nothing happens. They turned up the power. Nothing's happening. Turned up the power again, and eventually, zzz, too much, and it fried off the little boy's penis. And they then didn't do the other twin because, oh dear, you just fried off his penis. And they went to the mom and said, oh, well, you have no choice. You pretty much have to take off the penis and castrate, cut off the testicles, because no one will love him if he has no penis, because, of course, the only reason you love a human being is because their penis, of course. Sarcasm font. So it was the 60s. She didn't know any better. And they ended up doing surgery on one of the identical twins and gave female anatomy and raised now her as a girl. And there was a scientist, Dr. John Money, who at the time, it was the 60s, peace, love, and granola. Everyone was saying, well, the only thing that determines if you're male or female, man or woman, is how you're raised. So if we take an XY individual and give him a dolly and put him in dresses, he's just going to take on a female, womanly gender. That's what they kind of believed in the 60s. And so they took this, was a little boy, genitals are gone. They recreated surgically a labia and put her in dresses and gave her dollies and all of that, raised her as a girl. And it was all reported that, hooray, what a success. This supports my theory, Dr. John Money's theory, that it's all in how we raise you. But it turns out he was a pervert, and it's a terrible story. He'd bring the kids in, it's these two twin siblings, and have them pretend to have sex with each other as children. They were 6 years old, and they had to pretend to have sex with each other while he videotaped it, because he said, that's how you learn sex roles. No, it's not. And it turns out, in Brenda now, it was Bruce and then it was Brenda, it's not their real name, as, now I'm making air quotes, she got older, she liked to play with boys and she liked to work on cars and she was attracted to women and was so confused. And when she was about 12, 13 years old, went to her mom and said, I'm so unhappy, I just don't fit in, I'm going to kill myself. And then the mom said, okay, here's what's going on. You were a boy, this is what happened to you. And then he was like, oh, it makes sense. Cut his hair, took on the male identity, eventually got reconstructive surgery to have a penis that, you need a pump. But, and so for a while it looked like it was a nice story, but it's a tragic story. Both twins are dead. They both committed suicide. Their early life experiences, I think, had a lot to do with that. So the take-home message here is it's not just how you raise somebody, it's both. And we're going to see this throughout this discussion, throughout the whole semester. When anyone asks you, is it nature or nurture? It's always both for everything. The body doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a society. But society matters. The matters what the body is. So is gender and sex nature or nurture? It's always both. And then finally, gender identity. I shouldn't say transgendered. I'm sorry, it should be transgender, no ED at the end. So that is, you may have a penis and testicles and a Y chromosome, but and you've always known that you are female, you are a woman. And they have found parts of the brain that control gender identity. So what determines sex and gender? There's no answer, because we've seen some differences by chromosome and genitals and gonads and hormones and what you're assigned and all these things. So it's no one easy answer. So let's look at the development of biological sex. So we'll start with sex and the development of that. We have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs are autosomes, one from mom, one from dad, but your 23rd pair, those are your sex chromosomes. And generally you're XX or XY. So the father determines the sex of the baby. Mom can only give an X, but dad can either give an X or a Y. If dad gives an X, baby's XX female, and assuming everything is average, XX female and XY male. Looking at the chromosomes, the X chromosome and the Y chromosome, Y is by far the smallest chromosome. And it doesn't have any genes that are necessary for life because it can't. because if it had the gene on it to grow a liver, then half the population wouldn't have a liver. So the Y chromosomes, it's shrinking actually over time. The Y chromosome only has, maybe 70, 80, 90 at most. It's shrinking genes on it. Genes to see if you have hairy ears, and genes to grow a penis is what's on the Y chromosome. The X chromosome, though, that's a big one. That's maybe 2,000 genes on there, because you cannot survive without an X chromosome. Everyone has to have at least one. And that does control color vision, some aspects of color vision, blood clotting, brain development, and a number of other things. Now, you only need one X chromosome. So males only have one X chromosome. Females get two, but don't need to. So one X chromosome is randomly inactivated in most female cells. And that little clump of inactivated X chromosome, it's this little dot of condensed chromosomal material. It's called the Barr body. And you can look at those cells, and that's what in an amniocentesis, to identify if it's male or female, they usually look for that clump of condensed chromosomal material that was once an inactivated X chromosome. Because so females are going to shut off half their X chromosomes because you only need one. And what this means, this X inactivation, so here we are. Women have one X from mom, one X from dad. Men, boys, have all of mom's X chromosome, and they have all of dad's Y chromosome, but there's not many genes on that. So they're getting all of mom's X chromosome genes in boys. So they're getting mom's color vision and mom's blood clotting and mom's brain and these other things. Let's just assume they're not really, but assume we're on the X chromosome. Girls, though, are getting 50-50, half of mom's X and half of dad's X. So girls are kind of a patchwork, 50% of mom's and dad's X chromosome, and boys are all 100% mom's X chromosome. So this means a few things. Males are more related to their mother than to their father, all right? Males get 22 chromosomes, the 22 autosomes from mom and 22 autosomes from dad, and they get X from mom and a Y from dad. X is a bigger chromosome. So here's a trivia. It works out that males are 6% more related to their mother than they are to their father, because they're getting 6% more genes because X chromosome is bigger. Another thing, sons are more related to their mothers than daughters are, because a son gets 100% of mom's X chromosome. A daughter gets on average 50% of their mom's X chromosome. So it's another trivia, I think. Boys are 3% more genetically related to their mothers than sisters are. So you got a boy and a girl, they're the siblings. The boy is more related to the mom than the daughter is related to their mom, because she had half her X chromosomes turned off, and he has all of his X chromosomes from mom turned on. Last one, male identical twins are more identical than female identical twins. That's because males get all of mom's X and females get a patchwork, because that X inactivation happens after the eggs have split. So male identical twins are more identical. All right, now prenatal sexual differentiation. During the first 6 weeks when you're an embryo, you have both. You have uncommitted, you don't have a penis and a vagina yet, but you have the precursors to both, to what will become male and what will become female. You have both of them. The Wolffian duct system will become the male system. Epididymis, vas deferens, seminal vesicle, ejaculatory duct. You also have an immature Mullerian duct system that will become female. Fallopian tubes, uterus, inner vagina. Y chromosome will turn it on we used to think the Y chromosome determined it. Of course we did, but the X plays a role as well. But I'm going to talk about what the role of the Y chromosome is. So the Wolffian duct system, that's going to be the internal male anatomy. The Mullerian duct system, that's going to be the internal female anatomy. So how it happens, how you differentiate, around your 7th to 8th week, so at the end of the time you're an embryo, if you have a Y chromosome, there's something called the sex determining region of the Y chromosome. And it switches on, and it makes testes determining factor, and they make testes. And then testes make 3 hormones: testosterone, and then testosterone is converted, some of it is converted into dihydrotestosterone, and you also make anti-Mullerian hormone. If you have a Y chromosome, you don't need a uterus, you don't need fallopian tubes, shut that down. So it looks like this. You have Y chromosome, sex determining region of the Y chromosome is going to make the testes develop. Testes make 3 hormones. Testosterone. What testosterone does, it binds all over the body. It's going to change your muscles and your GI tract and your brain, and it causes development of the internal male reproductive anatomy. So if you have seminal vesicles and epididymis and prostate gland, internal anatomy, testosterone does that. Then testosterone is converted into dihydrotestosterone, and that's responsible for growing the external anatomy. So if a little baby's born with a penis and a scrotum, DHT did that. And 5-alpha reductase is the enzyme that converts testosterone to DHT. So if you are missing this enzyme, which happens in guavadoces, you got testosterone, you got a Y chromosome, you got testosterone, your body's been masculinized, you have internal male anatomy, you have testes, you just don't have a penis when you're born. And then when you hit puberty, testosterone makes it grow. What looked like a clitoris grows, and you got a working normal penis. All right, so testosterone, internal anatomy, reproductive anatomy, dihydrotestosterone, external, penis and scrotum. And testes also makes anti-Mullerian hormone. Shut down the female. You don't work, so you don't need a fallopian tube and a uterus and any of that. So it's going to make the internal reproductive female structures degenerate. And if you have no Y chromosome, the X chromosome, we were learning more, does play a role as well. So there is a dosage-sensitive sex reversal gene which suppresses the expression of SRY. But if you have no Y chromosome, the Mullerian duct system will develop. That's the default anatomy. And you're going to have internal and external female anatomy. So that is the prenatal differentiation. In the next video, we'll talk about physiological differences between males and females, and there are more than you think.